If you played The Force Unleashed 2, you were handed a fact and told to live with it. Darth Vader, standing over a trembling figure designated Subject 1138, delivers the line with total authority. You are a clone. Your memories are implants. Galen Marek is dead. Move on. Most people did. The fandom's consensus on this point runs almost unanimously in one direction. The overwhelming majority of discussion treats Starkiller in TFU3 as a clone, full stop. The game presents it. Wookieepedia confirms it. The wiki entry for Subject 1138 is unambiguous. A clone of Galen Marek, produced at Kamino, retaining the original's memories as implanted data. Case closed. Except Sean Williams, the man who actually wrote the novel adaptation published the same month as the game, refused to close the case. And what Williams left deliberately open, combined with what Sam Witwer, the voice and motion capture performer behind Starkiller, has said across multiple interviews about the cancelled Force Unleashed 3, points towards something the games never quite said out loud. Vader's clone declaration wasn't a biological status report. It was the first move in a new round of psychological control. And Force Unleashed 3, the sequel that was reportedly cancelled before a single frame of concept art was produced, was built to prove it. That's the story most fans never got. Not because it's buried in some private archive. The novelization is findable. The Witwer interviews exist. But because the Legends designation in April 2014 buried the entire mythology before its own ending could arrive. This is the case for what was really going on beneath the surface of a story that deserved a third chapter. Start with what's confirmed, because the baseline is the foundation everything else builds on. In the original Force Unleashed, released 2008, Galen Marek is Darth Vader's secret apprentice. Vader trained him in secret, in direct violation of the Sith Rule of Two, hidden from Palpatine. The purpose was operational. Use Starkiller to hunt down surviving Jedi, eliminate threats to the Empire, and eventually, under ideal circumstances, help Vader destroy Palpatine himself and take the throne. Vader used Starkiller under the guise of mentorship, while the relationship was, from its foundation, purely instrumental. When Palpatine discovered the arrangement, Vader was forced to act. He apparently killed his own apprentice. In the canonical light side ending of TFU1, Galen Marek doesn't simply die. He sacrifices himself in battle against both Vader and Palpatine, buying time for the rebel leaders to escape. His death becomes the founding act of the Rebel Alliance. The symbol on the rebel flag comes from his family crest. That sacrifice, that specific choice to die for something rather than live for Vader, is the defining act of Galen Marek's character. Vader recovers the corpse and takes it to Kamino. Force Unleashed 2, October 2010. The game opens on the cloning facilities of Kamino. Rain, gray ocean, sterile corridors. A figure wakes up. Vader tells him he is Subject 1138, the first physically identical, successful clone of Galen Marek, produced after a long sequence of failed, aberrant clones. He has Galen's memories, transferred as implants. He has Galen's face, his voice, his force sensitivity. But according to Vader, he isn't Galen. He is property. He is a weapon being calibrated. He is told this with the same flat certainty Vader uses for everything, and the game treats the declaration as the established premise around which everything else operates. The novel, published simultaneously, does not. Sean Williams is worth establishing before his words are examined, because his credentials matter. He has written 75 short stories and 35 award-winning novels. He adapted both Force Unleashed games for prose publication. These weren't ghost-written movie tie-ins with someone else's outline. Williams has enough standing in the science fiction field that Titan Books ran a dedicated author interview as part of the TFU2 promotional campaign. In that interview, Williams was asked directly about the returning protagonist. The specific question was about Starkiller's reappearance in the second game. Williams' answer, in his own words: "The reappearance of Starkiller throws everything into confusion. Is he an imposter, a clone, or the original, somehow returned from the grave? That's 3 options, not 1. And this is the author of the definitive prose version of the story, declining to resolve the question the game presents as resolved. Williams is listing the clone status as one possibility among three, including the possibility that this is simply Galen Marek, alive, returned. He didn't misspeak. He didn't hedge to avoid spoilers. The novel itself, according to the review on theforce.net, arrives at a thematic conclusion that deliberately sidesteps the binary. The review's summary of the book's arc: Starkiller must come to terms with the fact that it doesn't even matter whether he's a clone or not, that he is who he believes himself to be, regardless of biological origin. The novel's climax isn't a DNA test or a midichlorian scan. It's a character deciding that the question Vader posed to destroy him is the wrong question. That's not confirmation of clone status. That's specifically the novel refusing to supply the confirmation the game assumed. But Williams' refusal to confirm isn't just a literary flourish. It's built on an internal logic the novel embeds without stating as explicit text, and that logic is worth walking through carefully, because it's where the case actually lives. Subject 1138 retains Galen Marek's memories. That's established in both the game and the novel, and it's uncontested. The question is what kind of memories they are. Vader's framing is that the memories are implants, a copy of Galen Marek's experiential record, downloaded into a new biological substrate. Think of it as a hard drive copied onto new hardware. The data is there, but it's a reproduction. The original is dead. What Subject 1138 experiences as memory is, under this framing, a performance of someone else's past, rather than a continuation of his own. The novel's Subject 1138 doesn't function that way. His love for Juno Eclipse isn't a stored instruction or a behavioral parameter. It operates as a living motivation, generating real emotional responses in real time, driving his choices in ways that can't be explained as programmed responses to stimuli. He doesn't just remember loving her. He loves her, present tense, with the full weight of his lived history behind it. The grief he carries for moments he supposedly only witnessed through implanted records functions the way grief functions for people who actually experience the loss. It hurts in the specific, idiosyncratic way that personal grief hurts, not the general way that information about grief is known. A book reviewer who covered the novel at the time made the point directly. He can't be a clone, the argument went, because he retains all the emotions and feelings built up during a life. Not a facsimile of memories, but the memories themselves, still generating the same emotional responses they always generated. That's a reviewer's interpretation, not a passage from the text. But it's a reasonable reading of what Williams put on the page, and it points toward the distinction the novel is drawing. There's a difference between having a copy of Galen Marek's memories and being the person those memories belong to. General Ram Koda, who is force blind, sensed the same force signature in Subject 1138 as he'd sensed in the original Starkiller. Identical, not similar, not close enough to be confusing. The same. What Koda is picking up isn't visual or intellectual. It's the specific energetic signature of a consciousness embedded in the Force. And that signature is identical to Galen Marek's. Now add the broader Legends context. Cloning Force users in Star Wars Legends isn't impossible. That framing goes too far. Luke Skywalker existed. A clone of Luke Skywalker, created from the hand he lost at Bespin, used as a weapon by a resurrected Joruus C'baoth. Palpatine returned in clone bodies after Endor. The precedent is established. What Legends consistently shows, across those examples and others, is that cloning Force-sensitive individuals produces degradation. The Force connection in clones is diminished, unstable, or functionally compromised relative to the original. Not absent, not impossible, reliably degraded. Galen Marek, by the end of TFU3, was pulling Star Destroyers out of orbit with direct Force application. His Force signature was, by any in-universe measure, exceptional. Under the established Legends pattern, Cloning him should produce a result with a diminished or unstable force connection, not a perfect replica. Yet Subject 1138 is described in-game as the first physically identical successful clone, and what Coda senses is a force signature that matches the original precisely. Physically identical is careful phrasing. It says nothing about force identity. It says the body is right. It doesn't claim the force presence is right. And yet the force presence is also right, which is either a miracle of cloning science that runs counter to every other legend's precedent, or it's a data point supporting a different explanation. The novel, built on Williams's deliberate ambiguity and this internal logic, is pointing at something. Not stating it, pointing at it. The statement was TFU3's to make. To understand why TFU3's planned ending matters, it helps to understand what Vader actually wanted from the clone project, and what the lie accomplishes that the truth couldn't. Vader's goal with the original Starkiller was established in TFU1. Under ideal circumstances, Starkiller would have helped Vader kill Palpatine and become a proper Sith apprentice. That plan failed because Galen Marek, when given the choice, sacrificed himself for something that wasn't Vader's agenda. The light side ending of TFU1 is, at its core, Galen Marek choosing to be someone Vader couldn't control. That's the problem Vader faces in TFU2. Whatever Subject 1138 is, clone, original, something the novel refuses to categorize, he carries Galen Marek's complete experiential and emotional architecture. If he knows he's the original Galen Marek, he has continuity of identity. He has a story that belongs to him. His sacrifice at the end of TFU1 was his act, his choice, his moral statement. His love for Juno Eclipse has the full weight of his lived history behind it. His connection to Coda, to the Rebel Alliance, to the idea of something worth fighting for, all of it's rooted in experience that genuinely belongs to him. Tell him he's a clone, and every root is severed. A clone didn't make that sacrifice. A clone's love for Juno Eclipse is an implant, not a history. A clone's memories of Coda and the Rebels are data, not conviction. A clone's resistance to the dark side has no foundation in genuine experience. It's programming. You're not Galen Marek. You don't own those memories. The man who did those things is dead, and you're a copy, walking around in his body, wearing his feelings like borrowed clothes. That's what Vader gains from the lie. An apprentice whose entire sense of self is contingent on Vader's narrative. If Subject 1138 is a clone, his existence is Vader's project. His purpose comes from Vader. His identity comes from Vader. The one person in the universe whose version of reality he'd need to accept in order to know who he is Vader. That's a control mechanism, a psychological architecture designed to replace the foundations Galen Marek built for himself with a foundation that only Vader can provide. Williams understood this. The novel's thematic resolution, that the clone question doesn't matter, that you are who you believe yourself to be, is the protagonist actively dismantling Vader's control mechanism rather than solving the biological question. Subject 1138 doesn't need to prove he's the original to be free of Vader's framing. He needs to stop treating Vader's framing as the question worth answering. That's the novel's argument. And it's a more interesting argument than he was a clone all along, or he wasn't a clone actually, because it's about who gets to define you, and whether the person trying to define you has any legitimate claim to that authority. Vader didn't. He never did. And Force Unleashed 3 was built to prove what that actually cost him. The skeptic position on Vader's power deserves genuine engagement before it gets challenged, because it's not a stupid argument. It goes like this. Starkiller, across both games, is visibly and spectacularly overpowering Vader in their direct confrontations. He's throwing him through walls. He's repelling his lightsaber strikes with force pushes. He's winning fights that should be impossible for anyone short of Yoda or Palpatine at their peak. If Vader were deliberately holding back, the argument goes, you'd expect some in-universe signal that he was doing so. A moment where the mask slips, where he shows calculation rather than effort, where the audience is given a reason to believe the fight is staged rather than genuine. Instead, the games show what looks like Vader genuinely trying and genuinely losing. The counter-argument, put plainly by fans who've thought about it seriously: there's no plausible way Vader was absorbing those beatings and thinking to himself that this was a convenient moment to hold back. It's a reasonable read of the games in isolation. The challenge is that the games weren't designed in isolation. W. Hayden Blackman, the writer and lead developer of both TFU games, went on record with a clear statement about the intended power hierarchy. Starkiller shouldn't be as strong as Vader. That's the developer's stated design intention, not a fan inference, not a retcon. The person who built the story said, explicitly, that the character was designed to exist below Vader in the power hierarchy. The fights were built around a protagonist who was powerful enough to feel legendary while remaining subordinate to the person who made him. If Blackman's intended hierarchy puts Vader above Starkiller, and the games visually show Starkiller winning those fights, the gap between intention and presentation has to be explained somehow. The holding back thesis is the explanation that makes those two things consistent. It's not wishful thinking on the part of Vader fans. It's the reconciliation the story itself requires if you take the developer's stated intention seriously. Vader's combat suit adds a separate layer. The suit built after Mustafar is a permanent constraint. He can't breathe without it, can't move without it, and the chest panel design creates a specific vulnerability to Force lightning that Starkiller exploits in both games. Every time Starkiller wins a fight against Vader, he wins at least partially through that exploit, and the games are built around that weakness mechanically. The question of whether Vader was sandbagging is analytically separate from whether the suit was limiting him. Conflating the two flattens the picture. A Vader held back by his suit, and a Vader choosing not to fully engage, are both Vaders who aren't showing you what he can actually do. They compound each other rather than cancel out. Sam Witwer told people what Force Unleashed 3 would have shown. And what he described isn't a subtle narrative implication, it's the story explicitly built to resolve the debate. Witwer's authority on this subject is specific, not general. He provided both the voice performance and the motion capture for Starkiller across both TFU games, not just lending his voice to an existing character, but physically embodying the character's movement, expression, and physical presence. He also voiced Emperor Palpatine in TFU2. He is the voice of Darth Maul across Star Wars, The Clone Wars, and Star Wars Rebels. He appeared at Rebel ScumCon 2025 alongside David W. Collins, the voice of Proxy, for a dedicated Force Unleashed panel. He was announced as a guest at Star Wars Celebration 2025. His engagement with this material isn't archival. He's still actively discussing it, still being invited to discuss it, still part of the conversation the fandom is having about a game that shipped 15 years ago. More directly relevant, petition materials documenting TFU3's development describe Witwer as having co-developed the third game's story alongside Blackman as work was winding down on TFU2. He wasn't just the performer, he was in the room where the story was being built. When he describes what TFU3 would have been, he's describing something he was part of constructing. What Witwer has said across multiple interviews, including a Fanthatrax.com piece specifically titled around his TFU3 comments, describing the sequel as a little spoiler for an alternate universe. Force Unleashed 3 would have picked up directly from TFU2's light side ending. That ending, in the game, shows Starkiller defeating Vader and capturing him for delivery to the Rebel Alliance. It's a moment that functions as a triumph. Vader in chains, Starkiller standing over him, the protagonist apparently having completed what two games were building toward. TFU3's first act would have dismantled that triumph immediately. Per Witwer's account, Vader breaks free without significant difficulty. Not a narrow escape, not a clever plan executed over several scenes. He breaks free, and then he decimates the rebel forces around him. The rebels who were supposed to be receiving this prize are instead being massacred by it. The finale Witwer described is the fight the entire trilogy was pointing toward. Starkiller confronts Vader one final time, tries to beat him the way he'd beaten him in the first 2 games, and loses. Not because of a trick or an environmental exploit or a lucky moment for Vader. Starkiller fights the way he's always fought, the way the games taught the player to fight, and discovers that what worked twice doesn't work when Vader stops absorbing it and starts responding. Witwer has said, across interviews and in corroborated accounts from fan discussions of those interviews, that Vader was holding back across the first 2 games. That in every confrontation, Vader was never truly applying the full weight of what he is. That TFU3's final fight was designed as the proof. Here is the fight where that stops, and here is the result. Starkiller loses. The holding back wasn't a fan theory. It was the intended structural conclusion of a trilogy, the 3rd act that would have made the entire arc legible retroactively. No single verbatim transcript of Witwer's most detailed TFU3 comments has been published in a fully accessible primary source. The fanthatracks.com piece confirms the interview exists and summarizes its content. Multiple independent sources corroborate the substance consistently. Vader breaks free easily, decimates the rebels, and defeats Starkiller decisively in the final fight. That's the TFU3 story as Witwer described it. The picture is coherent across sources, even where exact wording isn't available. Now loop back to the beginning with all of that loaded, because the clone lie and the power revelation are the same story. Vader needed Subject 1138 to believe he was a clone for exactly as long as it took to recapture him, to get him back under control before he could build the kind of genuine conviction that makes a person hard to manipulate. The original Galen Marek's resistance to Vader was rooted in identity. He knew who he was. He had people he loved and things he was willing to die for. The light side ending of TFU1 is proof of exactly how far that resistance could go. Vader couldn't afford a second round with that person. A clone is, by definition, starting from scratch. No accumulated conviction, no genuine history, no roots in anything that Vader didn't provide. The clone lie is Vader trying to reset the clock, to get a version of Galen Marek's power without any of the autonomy that made the original uncontrollable. Whether or not Subject 1138 was actually a clone is, in one sense, beside the point. What matters is what Vader was trying to accomplish by making him believe it. The novel keeps the question open because it understands this. Williams' 3-option framing, imposter, clone, or the original returned, isn't authorial indecision. It's the novel correctly identifying that the biological question and the identity question are separate, and that resolving the biological question resolves nothing meaningful. Subject 1138's resistance to Vader's framing is the novel's actual subject. His love for Juno, his pull toward the light side, his inability to function as the blank slate weapon Vader wanted. None of that depends on whether his DNA is original or replicated. It depends on whether the person Galen Marek was is still in there somewhere. And the novel's answer, oblique but consistent, is that he is. Coda's recognition of the identical force signature, the emotionally authentic memory architecture, the complete failure of the aberrant clones before Subject 1138, the careful language of physically identical that conspicuously doesn't extend the claim to force identity. Williams's deliberate refusal to confirm in his own promotional materials. These aren't proof in the sense of a direct quote from the novel saying he was never a clone. They're the structural evidence of a case the novel is making without stating, because the statement was TFU3's payoff, and TFU3 never got made. The timeline of why it never got made is more complicated than a single villain. The first reported cancellation of TFU3 happened in August 2010, 2 months before The Force Unleashed 2 even shipped. Paul Megan, LucasArts' then acting president, reportedly shut down development that was reportedly already underway. This is documented from a single trade report from that period, and it's worth treating with appropriate caution as a single-source claim. But if accurate, it means the initial cancellation was an internal LucasArts decision, made over 2 years before Disney acquired Lucasfilm. Blackman had been building the TFU3 story as TFU2 wound down. Petition materials note that no concept art was even produced before the cancellation. The story existed in Blackman and Witwer's heads. The game didn't exist anywhere else. Disney's October 2012 acquisition of Lucasfilm didn't initiate the cancellation, but it sealed off any path back. Disney shut down LucasArts entirely in April 2013, eliminating the studio that could theoretically have revisited the project under different circumstances. Then, in April 2014, Disney and Lucasfilm formally designated the entire expanded universe, both TFU games, both novelizations, every wiki entry and story thread, as Star Wars Legends. Not erased, preserved in a separate, explicitly non-canon category that functions in practice as an archive. The label allows the material to exist without obligating the new canon to acknowledge or continue it. Every story thread in Legends is, legally and creatively, fenced off from the new Star Wars continuity. Galen Marek's arc ends mid-sentence inside that fence. The question the novel raised about his identity doesn't get an answer. The power revelation TFU3 was built around doesn't land. The trilogy that Blackman and Witwer constructed together across the development of 2 games never reaches its third act. Academic sources on Star Wars canon describe the Legends label as containing the apocrypha of the Star Wars mythology, such as the Force Unleashed series. Apocrypha, material acknowledged but set aside, true in the world that produced it and nowhere else. That's the category Starkiller's story now occupies, and has occupied since April 2014. Witwer hasn't left it there. At Star Wars Celebration 2025, he was listed as a guest, still drawing audiences who want to talk about Force Unleashed years after the second game shipped. At Rebel Scum Con 2025, he and David W. Collins, the voice of Proxy, reunited for a dedicated panel on the games. He has publicly stated, quoted in Gaming Bible's April 2025 coverage of Force Unleashed revival interest, that he thinks the series is due for a sequel or remake/remaster. That's an active, ongoing statement of intent from the primary creative voice of the character, not archival nostalgia. Sam Witwer performing Starkiller was never just a voice acting job. He did motion capture, which means his physical movement and expression are embedded in the character's every gesture. When fans watch those cutscenes, they're watching Witwer move. His connection to the character is embodied in a way that most voice acting relationships aren't, and it shows in how he continues to advocate for its return. The fan community's response to these games hasn't faded in proportion to how long ago they shipped. The Force Unleashed 1, in particular, carries the kind of reputation in Star Wars fan spaces that tends to generate petitions, panel attendance, and sustained engagement, rather than nostalgic fondness that slowly diminishes. Fans who were teenagers when TFU1 dropped in 2008 are in their 30s now, and the gap between what the story was and what it could have been is something they've had 15 years to sit with. The remaster demand is real. The nostalgia is real. But it's more specific than general affection for a good game. It's hunger for an ending. The story arc Williams helped build across 2 novels, the power hierarchy Blackman established in development, the TFU3 finale Witwer has been describing in interviews since the cancellation. None of it has landed yet. The audience knows something is missing, even when they don't have access to the specific details of what was planned. Because the second game ends in a way that is unmistakably a middle chapter rather than a conclusion. Here's where the evidence lands, stated clearly. The game told you Subject 1138 was a clone. The novel, written by Sean Williams, published October 2010, the same month as the game, refused to confirm it. Williams himself listed 3 possibilities, including the original returned from the grave, and the novel's internal resolution sidesteps the biological question entirely in favor of asking, who gets to define your identity? The emotional architecture Subject 1138 carries functions more like lived experience than like implanted data. Ram Koda, Force Blind, sensed the same Force signature in Subject 1138 as in the original Starkiller. The Legends precedent for Force user cloning produces degradation, not perfect replication. Subject 1138 is described as physically identical, with language that carefully doesn't extend the claim to his Force presence, which matches the original perfectly. The novel doesn't contain a passage stating cloning a Force user perfectly is impossible. What it contains is a narrative structure built around the insufficiency of Vader's explanation, an author who declines to supply confirmation in his own promotional materials, and an implicit internal logic that points consistently away from the clone claim. W. Hayden Blackman stated the intended hierarchy. Starkiller shouldn't be as strong as Vader. Sam Witwer, who performed the character physically and co-developed TFU3's story alongside Blackman, described a planned finale in which Vader breaks free from his TFU2 capture without significant difficulty, decimates the rebel forces, and defeats Starkiller in a final confrontation where Starkiller fights the way he always fought and discovers it doesn't work. TFU3 was the proof that Vader was never in real danger. 2 games of a powerful protagonist winning fights he arguably shouldn't have won, resolved in a third act where the developer's stated hierarchy finally becomes visible on screen. LucasArts reportedly canceled TFU3 in August 2010, before a single frame of concept art existed, under LucasArts' then acting president. Disney acquired Lucasfilm in October 2012, shut down LucasArts in April 2013, and formalized the Legends designation in April 2014. The payoff Williams and Blackman and Witwer built toward never arrived because it was canceled before the first game in the series finished shipping. The novel's deliberate ambiguity was pointing toward a resolution that belonged to the third installment. The author left the question open because it wasn't his question to answer. It was the trilogy's. That trilogy exists as a completed story only in the minds of the people who built it, and in the partial record Witwer has been laying down in interviews ever since. Whether Galen Marek's story gets a canon conclusion, through a remaster, a new game, a continuation in any form, depends on decisions that haven't been made yet. Witwer is still asking for it. The fan base is still asking for it. The story as designed has an ending waiting for it. Right now, a 2010 novel by Sean Williams and a voice actor's ongoing interview circuit are the closest the audience has to the ending this story was supposed to have. You were right that the clone claim felt wrong. The novel was built to make you feel that way. The story was designed to resolve it in a third game that Vader's power level would have made definitive. It just never got the chance. If this is the kind of Star Wars deep dive you're here for, subscribe. There's more where this came from.